The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Great crowds were traveling with Jesus, and he turned and addressed them. If anyone comes to me without hating his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Which of you, wishing to construct a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if there is enough for its completion? Otherwise, after laying the foundation and finding himself unable to finish the work, the onlookers should laugh at him and say, "This one began to build, but did not have the resources to finish." Or what king marching into battle would not first sit down and decide whether with 10,000 troops he can successfully oppose another king advancing upon him with 20,000 troops? But if not, while he is still far away, he will send a delegation and ask for peace terms. In the same way, any one of you who does not renounce all his possessions cannot be my disciple. The Gospel of the Lord. At the beginning of the year, my cousin began to build a house for his family down in Massachusetts. And his brother-in-law is a general contractor, so he has some inside advantage. But even so, it's been so difficult to get this house built. All this year, the price of building materials has been skyrocketing, and it's so difficult to get anyone in to do any work. They laid the foundation early on, but it took months more to get the walls built and the roof. And then they finally got the kitchen in, but now they're waiting for the windows. And a modern economy is amazing when it works. You have people trading labor and goods and services, and everything seems to happen almost magically. And yet when things begin to break down, it doesn't go so well as we all experience. And at this point, they're hoping to get into their house maybe sometime in 2023. Maybe this is not a new problem, though. Jesus in the gospel today talks about a man who begins to build a tower, and he lays a foundation, and he begins to build the walls. But then he can't complete the tower for whatever reason. Maybe he runs out of funding. Maybe he runs out of workers. Maybe an earthquake comes and knocks it down. I don't know, but people laugh at him and say he began this tower. He couldn't even finish it. There are all sorts of examples of great construction projects that were begun but were never finished. If you go to Cincinnati today, you can take a tour of the Cincinnati subway, 2 miles of underground tunnels that were begun at the beginning of the 20th century. But when the Great Depression happened, all the funding for this project dried up, and all of a sudden, the subway was never completed. You can go walk in the tunnels, but to this day, no train has ever run underground in Cincinnati. Or famously, there's the Cathedral of Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, Spain. It was begun in 1882 by the great architect and artist Gaudí. Gaudí had this incredible plan for one of the most unique buildings in the world. And sadly, shortly after he began the construction, he was hit by a train in the streets. He was killed. Other people tried to carry on the work all through the Spanish Civil War and World War II and the Great Depression. But 140 years later, they're still building it. It's never been completed. A few years ago, they finally dedicated the cathedral because they were sick of waiting, and they just consecrated it in an unfinished state. And they figured out that the building permits had expired like 100 years ago. And so finally they restarted the building, and they're hoping maybe in 2026 they'll complete the cathedral for the 100th anniversary of Gaudí's death. Well, Jesus today reminds us of the importance of paying attention to how we build things in life so we don't end up in situations like this. The first thing that Jesus reminds us of is that we have to build on a solid foundation. We have to build on the rock that is our faith in Jesus Christ. If we build our lives on anything else, we are building our lives on shifting sands. And when the storm comes or the earthquake comes, everything is going to fall down unless there's a solid foundation. Even other things that seem very important, like family relationships, like possessions, like career, they're important, but they're not solid enough to build our lives on. That's why Jesus, in an almost extreme way, says, you've got to hate your mother and father. You've got to give up all your possessions. He's talking in an extreme way to make a point, but the point is real. We've got to build our lives on the rock of our faith in Jesus Christ, the love that God has for us in Jesus. That's the only thing that's solid enough to withstand all the shifting sands of time. Someone who built his life on the rock is St. Andre Bessette. St. Andre Bessette was a simple doorkeeper in a monastery up in Montreal. And he had this dream to build the largest church dedicated to St. Joseph in the world, St. Joseph Oratory up in Montreal. And right around the same time that they were building the Cincinnati subway and Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, he was building this church. And just like those projects, his funding dried up in the Great Depression. He had no more money. He had laid the foundation. He had begun to build the walls, but the church, he couldn't complete it. And so he took the statue of St. Joseph that he had, and he put it out in the middle of this uncovered, unfinished church. And he said, okay, St. Joseph, if you don't want to get rained on, you've got to come up with the funding for the roof of this place. And sure enough, almost miraculously, in the middle of the Great Depression, funding arrived, and a roof was built, and the church was complete. St. Andre, he didn't have any experience as an architect. He didn't have any money. He didn't have any organizational skills. All he had was his simple faith in God and this dream and a dedication to St. Joseph. But with that, he could do miraculous things. The other thing that Jesus is reminding us, though, is that, okay, once we have that foundation, we've got to work hard to build upon it. Anything that's of value in this life, in this world, takes hard work. It takes time. It takes patience. It takes lots of prayer. It takes lots of trust in God. It takes ingenuity. It takes creativity. All those things that we need to build something of lasting value in this world. Sometimes we've got to work like it all depends on us. And then we've got to pray like it all depends on God, because both those things are true in the mystery of God's grace. And so Jesus is teaching us how to build. He's teaching us about the value of labor, of work, of hard work to get things done. On this Labor Day weekend, we can think about the dignity of work and how much it accomplishes in life. It seems like it's fashionable these days to attack people who go and do their job. With the politicalization of everything in our society, it seems like people, doctors and nurses and police officers and teachers and even priests, especially anyone who works in the public eye, it's so hard. It's so hard because people don't value people who just go and do their work. And that doesn't, and we can certainly criticize people who do a bad job, but so many people do a good job. So many people just go to work to support their families day in and day out. And we have to value that. We have to see the value of everyone working together to build up something that's so much greater. And what happens when people don't go to work? We have to provide opportunities for the underemployed and the unemployed. And the church has some very beautiful things to say about the dignity of work. And I want to read a little bit from the Catechism about what the church says about work. And it's a little bit long, but I want to read the whole thing because every part of it is so valuable. And it all sticks together. Human work proceeds directly from persons created in the image of God and called to prolong the work of creation by subduing the earth. Hence, work is a duty. If anyone will not work, let him not eat. Work honors the Creator's gifts and the talents received from him. It can also be redemptive by enduring the hardship of work in union with Jesus, the carpenter of Nazareth, and the one crucified on Calvary. We We collaborate in the work of the Son of God. Everyone has the right of economic initiative. Everyone should make legitimate use of his talents to contribute to the abundance that will benefit all and to harvest the just fruits of his labor. We should seek to observe regulations issued by legitimate authority for the sake of the common good. Economic life brings into play different interests, often opposed to one another. This explains why the conflicts that characterize it arise. Efforts should be made to reduce these conflicts by negotiation that respects the rights and duties of each social partner, those responsible for business enterprises, representatives of wage earners, for example, trade unions, and public authorities when appropriate. Economic activity, especially the activity of a market economy, cannot be conducted in an institutional, juridical, or political vacuum. On the contrary, it presupposes sure guarantees of individual freedom and private property, as well as a stable currency and efficient public services. Hence, the principal task of the state is to guarantee this security so that those who work and produce can enjoy the fruits of their labors and thus feel encouraged to work efficiently and honestly. Another task of the state is that of overseeing and directing the exercise of human rights in the economic sector. However, primary responsibility in this area belongs not to the state, but to individuals and to the various groups and associations which make up society. There's more. Those responsible for business enterprises are responsible to society for their economic and ecological effects of their operations. They have an obligation to consider the goods of persons and not only the increase of profits. Profits are necessary, however. They make possible the investments that ensure the future of a business, and they guarantee employment. Access to employment and to professions must be open to all without unjust discrimination. Men and women, healthy and disabled, natives and immigrants. For its part, society should, according to circumstances, help citizens to find work and employment. Just a little bit more. A just wage is the legitimate fruit of work. To refuse or withhold a just wage can be a grave injustice. Remuneration for work should guarantee a person the opportunity to provide a dignified livelihood for himself and his family on the material, social, cultural, and spiritual level, taking into account the role and the productivity of each, the state of the business, and the common good. Agreement between the parties is not sufficient to justify morally the amount to be received in wages. Recourse to a strike is morally legitimate when it cannot be avoided, or at least when it is necessary to obtain a proportionate benefit. It becomes morally unacceptable when accompanied by violence, or when objectives are included that are not directly linked to working conditions or are contrary to the common good. Unemployment almost always wounds its victim's dignity and threatens the equilibrium of his life. Beside the harm done to him personally, it entails risk to the family. Forgive me for reading so much, but everything there is so important and so foundational. And we have to be reminded of these things sometimes because, if an economy gets too far away from these fundamental principles, then we have to be careful we're not building something that just comes crashing down. The church gives us these foundations. It's up to us to figure out how to build on them. And we can probably have some legitimate disagreements about the best way to do that. Human beings have a dignity in their work. And they're not just made for work. We are more than our work. Work is made for us. And, when we're reduced just to our work, that's what communism tried to do. It tried to reduce the human being to just the value of their labor. That's what slavery tries to do. It tries to say that person made in the image and likeness of God is really just to be used for their labor. St. Paul challenges that today when he writes to Philemon, and he returns Philemon's slave, Onesimus. And Onesimus has become a Christian. Philemon is a Christian. And so St. Paul says, I'm returning your slave to you, but no longer a slave. Now he is more than a slave. He is a brother. In doing this, St. Paul is challenging the whole Roman economy that was built on the free labor of slaves. But that's the radical nature of Christianity, which comes and says, no, every human being is of equal dignity, made in the image and likeness of God, slave and free, man and woman, Jew and Gentile. We are all made in the image of God. If we can find the value in our work and our dignity as human beings, that goes a long way to helping us be happy in life, because we spend so much of our lives in our work. The fact that cathedral in Spain has taken 140 years to build actually is not that unusual. Back in the Middle Ages, it would take hundreds of years to build these great cathedrals. And people would work day and night their whole lives at these cathedrals, knowing they would never see the fruits of their labor. They were building for future generations. They were building for the glory of God. One day a man came upon a building site in the middle of the Middle Ages. They were building this cathedral, and there were 3 stonemasons busy at work, crafting stone. And the man comes up to the first stonemason and says, "What are you building? What are you doing?" And the man says, "Well, what does it look like? I've been hitting this rock all day. My back is killing me. I can't wait till 5 o'clock when I get out of work." He goes to the next stonemason. "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, I've been spending all day crafting these stones and putting them together to build a wall. I'm so grateful to have this work to support my family." And finally he goes to the last stonemason. "What are you doing?" And the man looks back and admires his work, and with a twinkle in his eye, he says, "I am building a cathedral." If we can find the dignity and the meaning in our work, realizing we are building for something so much greater even than this life, then we'll find direction and meaning in that work. 125 years ago this month, the people of Newmarket got to work on this building, St. Mary's Church. And on September 15th, 1897, they laid the cornerstone of this church right outside. And those poor immigrants, poor mill workers, they were so generous, they worked together, and they built this church. And they knew they were not building a cathedral, they were building a country church. But what a pretty church they built. People come all the time into this church and say how beautiful St. Mary's is. And probably it was good they were not building a cathedral, because this church was started 15 years after the cathedral in Spain was begun. And we've been worshiping here 100 years while they're still trying to finish their church over in Spain. No, they wanted to build to worship God. And we are so much the beneficiaries of their faith and their hard work. And today we want to pledge to continue that work that they started. And so at the end of Mass today, I'd like to invite you to follow us outside. We're going to be re-blessing that cornerstone that was laid 125 years ago this month. And we'll be blessing every member, every household of this parish, because the work that we do for the glory of God endures into eternal life.